Welcome to the Elite BSC podcast, where our entire focus is helping commercial janitorial contractors succeed. You want a growing company, a thriving team, and healthy profits, and we are here to help. My name is Jordan Tong. I'm the founder of Elite BSC, a company dedicated to helping janitorial companies grow and thrive. I also serve as CEO and one of the owners of France Building Services. France is a janitorial company employing nearly 600 people. Since 2007, we grew from 1.5 million to more than 20 million in annual revenue and built what I think is one of the best teams in the world. The goal of Elite BSC in this podcast is to give owners in the industry a vision of where their company can be and the information and tools to get there. I want to share what I have learned over the years to make this a reality for you. Hey guys, it's Jordan here. So unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware of some of the unrest that is going on in our country. And right now, sort of the hotbed for that is Minneapolis. As it relates to immigration, control, and enforcement, and ICE, and, illegal immigrants being here and sort of the way that's being handled, and then the civil unrest that's come, and the criticisms that come with that. And there's just been all sorts of fallout that has happened, and I think I'm going to do my very best to thread the needle here, and I think it's something that we can't ignore necessarily in the janitorial industry, because I know that many of us have a very high immigrant population that works for us, and so not only are they business implications, just in terms of might be affecting our people, but they're just broader, the people that we are tasked with leading. There's issues going on in those communities, or those people are being affected in ways that we just need to be aware of and think about what the right ways to respond is to that. Maybe for those of you all that are not maybe as dialed into what's been happening, and I'm certainly not somebody that's a news junkie. In fact, I've tried to stay away from the national political scene a bit more in the last few years. But there's certainly, with some of these crackdowns that are happening, there's certain, quote unquote sanctuary cities that have been targeted for ICE kind of going in and doing more aggressive arrests and deportations and all that kind of stuff. And there's certainly been a lot of criticism of the way that is being handled. And anyway, but here's some things just to be mindful of. And I'm not even necessarily picking a side here, just because I don't find a home in either political party these days. But I think it's helpful to at least be aware of the kinds of things that are happening on the ground, and then our responses, what they might be to those things. So I have a friend in the industry who has a primary immigrant population that works for them. And this particular it's a family business. They were immigrants as well, or at least the parents were. And there had been some people that had worked for their family, or had worked for the business, that their families have kind of been torn apart as a result of a crackdown that's happened in that area. And that's just presented lots of relational challenges that has made it hard on this business. And sort of in keeping with that, it's caused operational problems for their business, because they had a couple of people in a key roles that are now no longer with the company and are being detained somewhere several hours from their home office, and also away from this person's wife and kids. And so that's just created a scenario that is heartbreaking. And, aside from the legality and what's the right thing to do and all that, it's a tough situation. And it has made things hard on their business now that they've got, a bunch of gaps and holes in cleaner positions and a couple of management positions, and some people that were privy to things that nobody else knew. And anyway, so that it's just, and I know that they are not the only ones. I know this has affected multiple people. And it's also created, I think this is another, as we think about some of the fallout or the effects of what's happening right now, is it's created this political climate that is just a growing hostility. People feel obligated to pick a side, and you really see that, like if you look at the case of what's happened, the tragic case with Alex Preddy. I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly. That people immediately felt the need to pick one or the other side, and then sort of lay hold to that narrative at all costs. And that's just sort of the political world that we live in, or the cultural moment that we're in. And it's tough not to get caught up into that mentality and that sort of thinking. But a lot of people do, and a lot of people are affected. And so they're coming at this from different perspectives, and they have different, ways that this is affecting them. And then there's just this culture of hostility that's surrounding that. And that certainly might be a part of what's happening within our own companies because of the situation. And then obviously, I don't want to gloss over what has happened with the death of Alex and some of the other, I think that's be the most prominent case, but it's just tragic. Like, it's absolutely tragic. Regardless of where fault lies, it's absolutely tragic. And people are frustrated, and there's a lot to blame to go around. And again, I'm doing my best to thread the needle here and just sort of explain how things have happened and what's going on. So, why do I bring all this up? I just want us to think about, because we're affected with this in our country. Most of you, unless I have some listeners in other countries, then you can just ignore me here. I want to think about how owners in our industry, because we have immigrant populations working for us and we live in this culture, how do we lead well in this particular time? And lead our companies well and be good stewards of our companies in the midst of this sort of unrest that's going on, and maybe even some uncertainty about the way the government is handling certain things. And so I have three things that come to mind as I was planning this podcast out. And the first one is that as business owners, we have an obligation to our stakeholders, our employees, our team members, our leaders, or anybody who has an ownership position in the company, to comply with the laws to the best of our ability. And again, this isn't taking a stance necessarily on what are good laws and bad laws, but it is our obligation to maintain the health of our organizations. And so long as we're not violating our consciences or feeling like we're committing a moral wrong by obeying laws, then we should do our best to comply with those laws. And it's just going to help. It'll help protect our companies. And we're going to be, regardless of how you want to handle this cultural moment, you're going to be in a better position to do that well, with more influence and power and money, et cetera, if you keep your business intact. And you can, respond in any way that you would like. But when you have a healthy business, it's going to give you more of a platform to be able to do that. And so, this is simple stuff like E-Verify, keeping proper documentation, just kind of being in the know. I'm not suggesting that you become an ICE agent within your own organization at all, but just going about complying the right way and doing the documentation right. I know it's a pain in the butt, and it feels like we wish it wasn't necessary. But it can also just keep us from getting fines and running into situations where we've hired people that we shouldn't have hired. And just doing our due diligence on this stuff, I think, it benefits our company in the long run. I think it's the right thing to do as stewards of our companies. The next thing that comes to mind here is that we just need to make sure we have our own house in order. So I know several people, it's been 7 or 8, maybe 10 years ago that we really started taking this a bit more seriously and making sure we were complying, across the board, and our documentation was good and our records were good and all that kind of stuff. And certainly that's part. So if you're not there, make sure you're doing that stuff. But also what I mean by this is, as I've seen some companies affected by this, they've had some people leave the company that were pretty integral to their business, and it left a big hole in the organization. So there were some vulnerabilities by having too much information or the way we do things or relationships centered around one person, that it's put them in a little bit of a bind. And so we want to build a more resilient company so that in the event that something happens, it's not going to jeopardize everybody else that works for the organization. And so when I say get our house in order, I just mean we need to make sure that we have people are cross-trained, that we have systems and ways that we do things, that there's multiple people involved in relationships, and that in the event that we lost somebody, I think about this even for myself. If I wasn't here, will the company carry on? And we want to make sure that's true across all levels of the organization. And then lastly, number 3, the third thing that comes to mind, and this is really what was pressing on me as I was thinking about this, and it's always on my mind, and it's the motto or the purpose of our own company, is that we should love people really well. So I don't think that there is necessarily a contradiction between obeying laws and also loving people really well that may find themselves on the wrong side of that law or in violation of that law. And so I think that we can love our own people, whether legal or illegal immigrants, well. And again, there's a fine line to walk here in terms of making sure we're complying. But I don't feel the obligation to turn in every, if I see a speeder going down the road, I don't report them or whatever, unless I feel like it was going to be causing harm to somebody else. So there is a way to love the immigrant and love the people that work for us, and even love those who may be in violation of certain immigration laws, to love them well and care for them and treat them as human beings. And I think that will create a culture in our companies that will make people loyal and want to be with us. And again, I think you can be very, very conservative, which I am. I am a classic conservative in my views, but I still feel this deep obligation to love those that are in front of me, and in particular, those people that work in our companies or maybe their families. And so in this situation, regardless of who the person is or where they're at in life or things they've done wrong or whatever, it's still our obligation to do that well. And we want that to be the culture of our company. And so when you think about the unrest and some of the tragedies that have happened and maybe some of the mishandling of the way all this stuff is going about, if we can be a place that is loving people well, and I don't mean in this naive sense that we can change the world just by loving people, but there is a sense in where some of that's true, and we can be a beacon of reasonableness and rationality and love and care in our own companies as we see this stuff happening. And we can do that as, regardless, I think, of your political persuasion, we can do that well. And we can extend that same sort of love and grace to both our friends and our enemies. And I think that would just have ripple effects across our own organizations, which is, my audience is owners of companies as a general rule. And so I think we want to do that. We want that sort of culture in our companies. So I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to embody those things, to do your best to comply with laws and regulations, to make sure your company is well run and systematized, and there's not glaring risks and weaknesses in the organization, and also to love those people well, and that your team is taught to love others well. And your company can become a safe harbor for a world full of people that are hurting and struggling, and we have the privilege in the janitorial industry of that being our employee base, and it's a privilege and an opportunity for us to do that well, and we should rise to the challenge. So anyway, I hope this is not too controversial, and I hope I threaded the needle well here, and I hope that you go out and do these things and love and serve people really well, and our industry can be one that's a light in the midst of really frustrating times.
If you found the information in this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform that you're using. If you would like more resources or help to grow your cleaning company, head over to elitebsc.com. We have loads of articles, videos, free tools, coaching options, and a lot more. If your company is greater than $500K in revenue and you want to take your learning experience to the next level, check out our mastermind group. You can learn more about that at elitebsc.com/mastermind.